The door closed, and every excuse quietly disappeared. For 3 years now, he had been talking about opening a coffee shop. He had notebooks filled with ideas, sketches of how the place would look, and even a name picked out. But that's all it was, just talk and papers. His friends were tired of hearing the same story. Every time they met, David would say the same things. Next month, he would start. Next year, everything would be different. He just needed a bit more money. He just needed the right time. He just needed to be more prepared. But somehow that perfect time never came. Instead, David spent his money on things that didn't matter. New shoes he didn't need, meals at expensive restaurants, the latest phone model. His weekends disappeared in parties and lazy mornings. Deep down, David knew he was lying to himself. He had enough excuses to fill a book. The economy wasn't good enough. The market was too competitive. He needed more experience. Other people had better chances than him. The list went on and on. Each excuse felt real at the moment, but they were really just walls he built around himself. Walls that kept him safe from trying and possibly failing. His job at the marketing company paid the bills, but it made him miserable. Every Monday felt like a punishment. Every meeting was torture. His boss didn't appreciate him. His coworkers gossiped behind his back. But leaving meant uncertainty, and uncertainty terrified David more than unhappiness. So he stayed, complaining but never changing, dreaming but never doing. Then one Tuesday evening, David's phone rang. It was his mother, and her voice was shaking. His father had collapsed at home, heart attack. They were rushing him to the hospital. David's hands went cold. He grabbed his keys and ran to his car. The drive to the hospital felt like the longest journey of his life. His mind raced with thoughts he had been avoiding for years. When was the last time he visited his parents? 2 months ago? 3? He couldn't even remember clearly. He had been too busy, he told himself. Too tired from work, too caught up in his own world. But sitting in traffic, watching the red lights change, David realized these were just more excuses, more ways he avoided the things that actually mattered. His father had always supported his dream. Always asked about the coffee shop. Always believed David would do something great. And what had David done? Nothing, just talked and waited and made excuses. At the hospital, the smell of cleaning products and medicine made David's stomach turn. He found his mother in the waiting room, her face pale and eyes red. She hugged him tight and they waited together. Hours passed like years. Finally, a doctor came out. His father had survived, but it was close, very close. The next few days would be critical. When David finally saw his father, his heart broke. This strong man who had built his own business from nothing, who had worked day and night to give David a good education, now looked so small in that hospital bed. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hummed. His father's eyes were closed, his breathing supported by a ventilator. David sat beside the bed and held his father's hand. It felt fragile, the skin thin and cold. Days passed. David took time off work and stayed at the hospital. Slowly, his father got better. The breathing tube came out. He could talk again, though his voice was weak and raspy. The first real conversation they had changed everything. David was helping his father sit up, adjusting the pillows, when his father looked at him with tired eyes and asked a simple question. "Did you open that coffee shop yet, son?" The question hung in the air like smoke. David couldn't speak for a moment. His throat felt tight. He shook his head, and his father just nodded slowly, understanding everything that wasn't said. That night, sitting in his car in the hospital parking lot, David cried. Not just for his father's condition, but for all the wasted time, all the empty promises, all the excuses he had made while life kept moving forward. His father had almost died, and David was still just planning and waiting and being scared. Something inside him broke open that night, something that had been locked away for too long. The fear was still there, but now something else was there too. A decision, a line in the sand, no more excuses. David started visiting the hospital every single day. His father's recovery was slow and painful, but he was fighting. They talked more in those weeks than they had in years. Real conversations, not just surface-level updates. His father told stories about starting his construction business 30 years ago with nothing but a borrowed truck and determination. How he failed multiple times. How people doubted him, how scared he was, but he did it anyway. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, David finally admitted the truth out loud. "I've been scared, Dad, scared of failing, scared of what people will think, scared of losing my steady paycheck." Scared that I'm not good enough. His father listened without interrupting, his weathered hands resting on the thin blanket. When David finished, his father took a slow breath and said something that cut through all the noise in David's head. Son, I'm 62 years old. I almost left this world without seeing you really try. Not succeed or fail, just try. You think I'm disappointed you haven't opened the coffee shop? No, I'm sad you let fear make your decisions instead of you. Every day you wait is a day you're choosing safety over living. And look where that got you? Unhappy and full of regret. The words hit David like cold water. He had been fooling himself for years, thinking he was being smart and cautious. But really, he was just hiding. That night, David went home and dug out his old business plan from the bottom of his closet. The pages were wrinkled and the numbers outdated, but the dream was still alive in those words. He stayed up all night rewriting it, updating the numbers, researching locations, creating a real timeline. Not someday, not eventually, 6 months. He gave himself 6 months to open the coffee shop, no matter what obstacles came up. The next morning, David walked into his boss's office and gave his notice. 2 weeks, he said, and he felt both terrified and free at the same time. His boss tried to convince him to stay, offering a small raise and vague promises about future promotions. But David had heard enough promises, especially his own empty ones. He politely declined and walked out feeling like he could finally breathe properly. His friends thought he had lost his mind. You're quitting without another job lined up? In this economy, what about your rent? What about health insurance? Their concerns were valid, but David realized their fear was their own, not his. Some people are comfortable with the safe path, and that's okay, but it wasn't his path anymore. A few friends were genuinely supportive, excited even. They offered to help however they could. Those were the ones David needed around him. The hardest conversation was with his girlfriend, Rachel. They had been together for 2 years, and she liked stability, liked knowing the plan. When David told her about quitting his job to open a coffee shop, she went silent. For a long time, she just looked at him like he was a stranger. You're being selfish, she finally said. You're throwing away everything we've built for some fantasy. What about our future? What about the house we were saving for? David tried to explain, but Rachel didn't want to hear it. She had fallen in love with stable, predictable David. This new version scared her. 2 days later, she packed her things and left. Said she needed someone more responsible, more realistic. David sat in the suddenly quiet apartment and felt the weight of it all. He had just lost his job security and his relationship in the same week. The old David would have panicked, would have called his boss begging for his job back, would have promised Rachel he'd forget the whole coffee shop idea. But something fundamental had shifted. Standing in that hospital room watching his father fight for his life had broken something in David, or maybe it had fixed something. He wasn't the same person anymore who chose comfort over purpose. He called his father that night and told him everything about quitting. About Rachel leaving, about being terrified but moving forward anyway. His father's voice was still weak, but David could hear the smile in it. Now you're living, son. Now you're really living. The door behind you is closing. No more going back to who you were. And that's exactly what David needed to hear, because late at night when the apartment was empty and quiet, the doubts would creep in, whispering that everyone was right and he was making a terrible mistake. 3 months into his new life, David was barely holding it together. His savings were disappearing faster than sand through fingers. He had found a small location for the coffee shop in a neighborhood he loved, but it needed way more work than he had planned for. The walls needed repairing. The plumbing was a disaster. The electrical system was outdated and dangerous. Every contractor he called gave him estimates that made his stomach drop. He had budgeted for simple cosmetic work, not major renovations. His loan applications kept getting rejected. Banks looked at his business plan and saw risk. They saw someone with no restaurant experience, limited collateral, and a dream. 3 banks said no, then 4, then 5. Each rejection letter felt like someone confirming his worst fears. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe this was all a huge mistake. David would stand in the empty shop space, surrounded by exposed pipes and peeling paint, wondering what he had been thinking. Some days were harder than others. He took a part-time job at a warehouse to make ends meet. Loading boxes from midnight to 6 in the morning, then working on the coffee shop during the day, then falling into bed exhausted only to wake up and do it all again. His body ached constantly. His hands were covered in cuts and bruises from learning to do repairs himself through online videos. He couldn't afford professionals for everything, so he taught himself basic plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. He made mistakes, lots of them. Mistakes that cost time and money he didn't have. His friends stopped asking how things were going. When they saw him, they'd change the subject quickly, uncomfortable with his obvious struggle. Some friends disappeared completely, unable to watch him struggle or unwilling to be associated with what they saw as inevitable failure. David felt isolated in a way he never had before. Even his supportive friends didn't really understand what he was going through. They had good intentions, but regular jobs and normal problems. They couldn't relate to the specific terror of watching your entire savings evaporate while trying to build something from nothing. Then on a cold Tuesday morning, David's phone rang while he was installing new counters in the shop. It was his mother, and he knew from her first word that something was wrong. His father had another stroke, a bad one. David dropped his tools and ran. He made it to the hospital in record time, but part of him knew. The doctors were already talking about it when he arrived. Severe stroke, massive brain damage. The machines were keeping him alive, but his father was already gone. The decision about removing life support fell to his mother, and she couldn't make it alone. David stood in that hospital room for the second time in 3 months, but this time there would be no recovery, no more conversations. No chance for his father to see the coffee shop finished. His father's hand felt the same as before, but this time there was no squeeze back, no recognition in the eyes, just machines breathing and beeping while the man who raised him existed somewhere between life and death. After talking with the doctors and saying their goodbyes, David and his mother made the hardest decision of their lives. The funeral was packed with people whose lives his father had touched, workers he had employed over the years, neighbors he had helped, friends from church. Everyone had a story about how his father had been there for them, had given them a chance, had believed in them when others didn't. David was supposed to give a speech, but when he stood at the front looking at all those faces, the words disappeared. He looked at the casket and thought about all the times he had promised his father he would chase his dream. All the times his father had encouraged him, believed in him, waited for him to finally start. David's voice cracked when he finally spoke. My dad asked me once what I was waiting for. I gave him a bunch of excuses, but the truth was I was just scared. Scared of what you all might think. Scared of failing. Scared of trying. He died while I was still making excuses. He almost died 3 months ago, and that woke me up. But I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't brave enough soon enough. The tears came then, and David didn't try to stop them. But I know he didn't raise me to wait for the perfect moment. He raised me to build, to try, to live. So that's what I'm going to do, not for him exactly, but because of what he taught me. After the funeral, David walked into his apartment feeling completely empty. Everything he owned reminded him of different versions of himself. The comfortable couch where he had wasted thousands of hours. The desk where he had written plans but never acted on them. The walls covered in posters of other people's achievements. He walked to his bedroom door and saw a poster he had hung there years ago. It said someday in big fancy letters, someday I'll be brave, someday I'll start living, someday I'll make my father proud. David stared at that word until it started looking strange. Someday, a day that never comes. A permission slip he kept writing to himself to stay comfortable and scared. He reached up and tore the poster down. The sound of ripping paper felt good, felt right. He tore it into smaller and smaller pieces until it was confetti on his floor. His father was gone. That door had closed forever. All his excuses had died in that hospital room. There was no more waiting to do, no more perfect moment to prepare for. There was only now and what he chose to do with it. The next morning, David went back to the coffee shop with new energy. Not happy energy, he was grieving and exhausted and scared, but determined energy, focused energy. He worked 18 hours that day, and the next day, and the day after that, when he didn't know how to do something, he learned. When he couldn't afford to hire help, he figured it out himself. When he wanted to quit, he thought about his father's empty hospital bed and kept going. His mother started coming by to help. She was grieving too, and the work gave her something to focus on besides the empty house. She brought her friends from church. These women in their 60s showed up in old clothes ready to work. They painted walls and scrubbed floors and assembled furniture. They told David stories about his father he had never heard, how proud he always was when talking about David, how he would light up whenever David called, how he never stopped believing David would do something special. 2 weeks before the planned opening date, David sat on the floor of the nearly finished shop with his calculator and a pile of bills. He was $15,000 short. He had stretched every dollar as far as it would go, had done everything possible himself, had negotiated with suppliers, had cut every corner that could be cut safely, but the math was clear. He didn't have enough money to finish, stock the shop, and cover the first month's expenses. The old David would have seen this as a sign, proof that he should never have tried. Confirmation that dreams were for other people with more money or luck or connections. But this David just sat there thinking. He thought about his father working 2 jobs to put him through school. About all the times his father faced impossible situations and found a way through. Not around, but through. David pulled out his phone and opened social media. He had been documenting the renovation process, posting pictures and updates, but never asking for anything. Now he wrote a post that came straight from his heart. He talked about his father, about the dream he had waited too long to chase, about being 2 weeks away from opening but $15,000 short. He didn't make it dramatic or fancy, just honest. If you believe in second chances, in honoring the people we lost by becoming who they knew we could be, I'm asking for help. He hit post and put his phone down, not expecting much. Maybe a few encouraging comments, maybe some sympathy. But that night the notifications wouldn't stop. A childhood friend he hadn't spoken to in 5 years sent $5,000, said his father had inspired him too. Workers who had been employed by David's father started sending money, $50 here, $100 there. Some sent 20. One of his father's old employees sent $2,000 with a note that said, "Your dad gave me my first real job when no one else would. This is the least I can do." Strangers who had been following the journey donated. People who understood what it meant to honor someone by living fully instead of safely. Within 4 days, David had received over $20,000, more than enough to finish everything and stock the shop properly. But more valuable than the money was what it represented. A community, people who believed in what the coffee shop stood for, people who understood that this was bigger than coffee. It was about what happens when someone stops making excuses and starts building their life intentionally. Opening day arrived with clear skies and nervous energy. David unlocked the door of the Second Chance Cafe at 6 in the morning. His hands were steadier than he expected. He had barely slept, running through everything that could go wrong. But standing there in his shop, his actual real shop that existed in the world, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. His father wasn't there to see it. Rachel had never responded to his invitation. Some friends who promised to come didn't show up, but he had done it. He had taken an idea and made it real. The line of customers started forming before he even turned the open sign around. His mother was his first customer, ordering a cappuccino through tears she didn't bother hiding. David made it carefully, his hands remembering the thousands of practice cups he had made learning to use the espresso machine. When he handed it to her, she hugged him tight and whispered what they were both thinking. He would be so proud. And David knew it was true, not because the shop was perfect or successful yet, but because he had finally stopped waiting. That first month was chaos. Beautiful, exhausting chaos. Equipment broke at the worst times. The ice machine died during a heat wave. Staff called in sick on the busiest days. David made mistakes that cost money. He accidentally ordered way too much milk one week and not enough coffee the next. He undercharged customers, overcharged others, forgot orders, burned espresso shots. Every single day brought new problems he had never anticipated. But here's what was different. The problems were just problems. Not signs from the universe that he had made a mistake. Not proof he wasn't good enough, just normal challenges that came with running a business. He learned as he went, how to manage inventory better, how to schedule staff effectively, how to handle difficult customers with grace, how to fix minor equipment issues himself to save money. Some days were terrible. Days when nothing went right and he wondered why he had ever thought this was a good idea. Days when he was so tired he could barely stand. Days when the numbers looked bad and doubt crept back in. But he didn't quit, because he had learned something crucial in that hospital room. There would always be reasons to quit, always be excuses available. The door would always be there, offering an easy exit back to comfortable misery. But David had chosen to walk through a different door, the one that led forward into uncertainty and growth, and actually living his life instead of just passing time until death. 6 months after opening, the Second Chance Cafe was not just surviving but thriving. David had hired 3 employees. One of them was a young guy named Tommy who reminded David of his old self, full of ideas and fear in equal measure. Tommy would talk about wanting to open a restaurant someday, but then list all the reasons why it was probably impossible. One evening while closing up, Tommy asked David how he knew he was ready to open the shop. David stopped wiping down the counter and really thought about the question. "I wasn't ready," he said honestly. "I'm still not ready for half the things that happen every day. But my father died while I was waiting to feel ready. I realized ready is just another excuse. You're never going to wake up one morning feeling completely prepared and confident. You just have to be willing to be scared and do it anyway." Tommy nodded slowly, and David could see him processing this. David had learned that you can't make someone change. They have to want it themselves, but you can show them what's possible. You can be proof that ordinary people with fears and doubts can still build extraordinary things if they stop letting excuses make their decisions. That night, David added a new photo to the memorial wall he had created near the entrance. His father's picture sat in the center, surrounded by pictures of the journey, the empty shop space, the renovations, the community that helped, the opening day. Under his father's picture, David had placed a small sign with words that had become his philosophy. The door closed, and every excuse quietly disappeared. For Dad, who taught me that waiting for the perfect moment means waiting forever. As David locked up the cafe and looked back through the window at everything he had built, he felt gratitude. Not for success or money or recognition, but for the lesson his father's death had taught him. That life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. That excuses are comfortable, but emptiness is their price. That closed doors aren't tragedies. They're simply the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The old David who made excuses and waited for someday had died in that hospital room. The new David had been born the moment he chose action over fear. And that single choice, that one moment of deciding to stop preparing and start living, had changed absolutely everything.